Today we're looking at a different kind of AI story. It's one that started with a simple question over a decade ago and grew into Lumawarp. It's a new machine learning engine built at Lucidity Sciences, and Dr. Lexi Pasi, CEO and mathematician, is here with me in the studio to talk about the system that is designed to learn from your data more accurately, efficiently, and reliably than many of today's AI models. Lexi, thanks so much for being here.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me.
So when we talk about AI today, I know it means a lot of different things to everyone, but how do you define AI at Lucidity Sciences, and where does your work fit into that landscape?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's not one that has a really definitive answer. I think the most important piece to remember is that the definition of AI has been changing for decades. So it's meant a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I've heard it said, and I do somewhat agree with this, that AI has become a little bit more of a marketing term than a technical term. That being said, I think there's a lot of people that will sort of debate what techniques, what mathematical or computational or engineering techniques count as AI. And I could have that debate all day. I'm a mathematician by background, so I could happily burn all of our time getting into the minutia of that, but I don't think that that's really what is relevant to people. Because I think that when people talk about AI, they do mean something, right? And they don't mean, oh, it's a neural network, or oh, it's decision trees. What I've kind of come to understand the use of AI as colloquially or culturally is that it's describing a transition in the way that we think about the role of technology in our worlds that is very similar to the shift that happened around the Copernican revolution. So the Copernican revolution was when we started to see sort of, the sun as being in the center of the solar system rather than the Earth. And prior to that, some of the dominating metaphors of physics or how the world works, they were very mechanical. So the universe was sort of like this giant Rube Goldberg machine where things just sort of like bounced off of each other until, an effect happened. And when we started to understand gravity better, we understood the world more in terms of these general forces that had these sort of subtle and disperse effects that, determined the way that the world moved. And I think that AI is a lot like that, right? So AI is like the introduction of this generalized force, or these forces, within the digital landscape that behave very differently than maybe the old paradigms of digital transformation did, where I'm just thinking about, I click this button and it takes me to the sign-in page and then I put in my login information. That's a lot more like mechanistic. So that's a very abstract answer, but I do think that AI has come to mean culturally sort of the analog of that shift into the Copernican revolution in terms of digital transformation within society.
Interesting. Thanks for that history lesson, too.
I hope it wasn't too much.
No, I appreciate that. That gives a lot of good context. And as far as this revolution goes, I'm wondering if you could tell me about Lumawarp.
Yeah.
And I know that it's becoming commercially available this month, so that's a big step for Lucidity Sciences. But what makes it different from conventional machine learning approaches, and why does that really matter?
It's a great question, and I think I'll start actually with sort of differentiating it from LLMs, just because those are sort of, at the forefront of people's minds in terms of what AI looks like. They are very good at processing sort of language-based tasks, right? That's the L, the second L, large language model. But what I like to remind people of is that, language as a tool evolved to help us communicate how to find edible berries near, our camp. And communicate that to each other. It didn't necessarily evolve to describe the full complexity of, our economic systems or complex supply chains. And so what often underlies those problems is just numerical data. And when you look at the LLMs, they're not as good at finding patterns in, very large amounts of numerical data. So what I like to say, sort of at a very basic level, is that Lumawarp operates as sort of numerical AI, right? So it lets you take in your data and find patterns in that complex data to help make better decisions, help optimize, help predict. And what we are able to do is do that more accurately and efficiently than the other machine learning alternatives on the market. And the reason that we're able to do that is we've really gone and reworked the entire mathematical underpinning of machine learning. That has two benefits, both the accuracy and efficiency. They come from the same place, which is that you're describing the actual underlying patterns more accurately. And because you're describing them more accurately using this more advanced math, the description is more compact and it's able to find those patterns and use those patterns much more quickly.
So with that, can you give me a real world example of how this is used with a business that is, and how it's already helping organizations become faster at understanding this information?
Yeah, I'll give a couple of examples. One is a little bit more, kind of cutting edge innovation. And then the other is very grounded, I think, in sort of everyday life and trying to improve the lives of people using AI. So the first example is really one of the first cases that we looked at with the very earliest prototype of this technology, which was looking at identifying the Higgs boson, also known as the God particle, right? So we were able to identify that very rare particle with a much higher accuracy than any of the other solutions out there. And one of the interesting things about that case is that because it's such a rare phenomenon, you have to process an enormous amount of data to be able to find it, right? And so what do you do with the data that doesn't have the interesting phenomena where you have to make the decision to throw it away? And so how quickly you're able to make that decision is really critical, right? Because with any rare phenomena where you're gathering a lot of data, you have to be able to identify it efficiently. So one of the things that we're able to do is provide identification of those sort of rare phenomena much more quickly and much more accurately, right? So that you're able to process much larger amounts of data without having to worry about throwing out very valuable signal. But then the example I like to use too that is probably a little bit closer to home than people, I think it's very cool to be working sort of on the cutting edge of physics. But bed sores, right? So that's a major issue for people staying in hospitals. It extends hospital stays, mortality rates. Pressure injuries are a very big problem for both hospitals and patients. So it's like a $26 billion problem a year. It's the #2 litigated issue besides wrongful death. And part of the challenge with pressure injuries, especially in ICU settings, is that it's hard to find a way of predicting who will get a pressure injury with precision. And that precision is important because it dictates where limited resources go, right? So there might be specialized beds that can help prevent pressure injuries, but you have to make intelligent decisions about who should get them based on who's most likely to get a pressure injury, and you have to do that with precision. So we've been able to, with our colleagues in nursing and epidemiology, come up with better ways of predicting who would develop these complications. And not only better predictions, but also using those machine learning models to interrogate, are there ways in which we'd be able to intervene to prevent the pressure injuries from happening in the first place?
That's really fascinating. How long has it taken to come up with these mathematical equations to help figure this information out?
It's a great question. Once the data is ready, and in both of these cases, our partners were able to come to us with the data and say, hey, I want you to take a look at this, see what patterns you can find, minutes. So it really only takes minutes to train and process these to create a machine learning model that can actually provide these insights.
That's amazing. And from 10 years ago, you've been working on this. How does it feel to know that this has come so far in the last decade?
Yeah, I think it's been a really incredible journey. This technology started as math on paper, math on whiteboards, and it stayed there for 10 years. Because I think that, one of the things that's been holding modern machine learning back is actually the math. And we've gotten away with that for a while by being able to kind of scale out the size of the data, scale out the size of compute. But I think we've seen a little bit of a slowdown, right? And this is kind of borne out as people look at the performance, that scaling law sort of being called into question. And this is not surprising necessarily, right? The world is a very dynamic and complicated place. And within that, you have to sort of admit that we're probably not going to have data on everything that could ever happen. Another application we've looked at is trading. That's a great example here. The market is incredibly dynamic. Just because you've looked at everything that's ever happened in a particular market doesn't mean you're going to know what happens the next day. And so being able to come up with machine learning algorithms that find the real underlying patterns so that they can generalize outside of the training data is going to be essential to move forward, because we can try to gather all of the data we have. It doesn't mean it's going to tell us anything about tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a great point. Can you talk a little bit about how, as AI becomes more embedded in decision making and Trust is a big part of this. How does Lucidity Sciences approach accuracy and reliability and risk, and especially with your work in hospitals? I think that's really an interesting aspect of this AI.
You know, it's been a guiding principle for us. I think part of the reason we want to come up with better math is for the better accuracy, right? There's a lot of contexts in which a bad answer is totally commercially workable. That's great. You know, keep doing what you're doing. There's a lot of settings in which a bad answer is catastrophic, you know, an existential question. And so what we've done is we've focused on this concept of generalizability. And generalizability basically means how accurate is this, not just on your training data or on the data that you've seen before, but how accurate is this on types of data that you haven't seen before. So we've been very careful as we're validating it to look at that generalizability phenomenon. And we know that mathematically, this is guaranteed to have better generalizability properties because of some of its underlying mathematical properties. So that's one big thing. The other big thing that we've been able to bring to the table of machine learning in general is that there's often been this sort of practical accuracy efficiency dial that practitioners are sort of turning, right? I want a more accurate model, but that model's too big and too slow, right? So I'm going to kind of, it's too slow to use, I'm going to kind of dial it back. And people have been fiddling with that dial when they deploy machine learning algorithms all the time in terms of deciding how simple versus how complex they want their model to be. What we're able to do is completely disrupt that trade-off, right? So you don't have to choose between accuracy and efficiency anymore. And we've been looking at our performance across the Tab Arena benchmark. So this is a benchmark that has been put out by a number of scientists, including some at Amazon AWS, to sort of evaluate, you know, both accuracy and efficiency of this type of AI. And what we found is that we're able to top the charts in accuracy while still having significantly better efficiency than the sort of largest models that do end up at the top of the chart, besides Lumawarp. So as an example, we're able to be the top performing model within that HELOC data set in that benchmark, so predicting home equity line of credit default rates. But we're able to do that by training a model in 1 hour on a gaming laptop versus the prior leading model, which took 500 hours on a very large supercomputing cluster.
Wow. I know you and I were talking beforehand about your analogy with cars. And I think that could be really helpful for people like me who don't have a, we don't have a PhD in mathematics.
Yeah.
But would you mind just sharing that so that I think it's so great at explaining what you're talking about on a scale that maybe most people can understand.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I like to talk about Lumawarp as being kind of like the engine for the car, right? We are not going to tell you where you're going to go with the car. We're not going to plan out your trip for you. But, you know, you can think of this as being kind of like a Ferrari engine. And so you can put it in, you know, put it in your car, take it wherever you want, but it's really going to be an upgrade in terms of the performance. And I think that, you know, oftentimes when people are interfacing with AI, they're interfacing with sort of the end tool, and they don't think a lot about what's going on beneath the surface, right?
I know I don't.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, of course, it's kind of complicated, it's a little niche, it's a little technical, but what's interesting is that when you start thinking about, okay, what is beneath the surface, and you realize that it's like the same 2 or 3 approaches, then you start to say, maybe model performance is bottlenecked by this sort of fundamental thing that underlies all of these AI tools. And that's certainly the case. You know, I think that we are starting to see that. So being able to get past that bottleneck and enable innovation within all of these different applications and verticals, which is what we do with our partners, right? So they have their own data, they'll bring it to us, we train a custom model for them or help them train a custom model, and then they're able to deploy that and get past some of the barriers that they would have normally been running into with alternative commercial solutions.
It sounds like a really exciting adventure that you're on for the future. And that leads me to this last question, but when you look into the future in a few years, how do you see AI changing how organizations work with data, and what role do you hope Lucidity Sciences plays in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the transition we're already seeing is, you know, you used to have a bunch of data and then you'd like look at a dashboard and it would have 20 different charts and you would just kind of, you know, hope that you could synthesize a good decision out of those somehow using your own sort of logic. One of the things that machine learning can be really good at, if it has the right underpinnings, is synthesizing that data to the decision point for you, right? But in order for that to happen, one, you have to have the right mathematical paradigms that are going to make sure that that decision is sort of adequately, generalized, that the risks are properly hedged, and there's a few different things that you can do to ensure that. The underlying machine learning approach matters, the underlying data matters, but then I think that the second part of that is we have to build up trust, right? If you want to be learning patterns to sort of take you all the way to the decision point, and it's going to be doing it in a way that isn't, as mechanistically A to B, then you're going to have to develop trust with the algorithms. And that involves both being able to explain and understand what the algorithm is doing. So we also bring to the table through this new mathematical paradigm better explainability tools. But then you also have to have models that perform better, right? You have to have models that are more accurate. You have to have models that adapt better to new circumstances. You have to have models that produce the answer quickly enough to be usable. And so I think that that is where we're heading with AI. Sometimes, the market gets over its skis a little bit. But it's the job of innovators to make sure that the technology is coming up behind to support that. And I think that that's what we are doing here with Lumawarp.
Thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of that, and good luck this month as this product goes out into the world.
Thank you. Thank you. We're really excited to continue to welcome more people to our beta program.